Just a note on the readings in general. As Messianic Jews, we often straddle two worlds. Our people have tremendous resources that we must learn from in the Jewish community, but most often Jewish resources do not understand Yeshua in the Jewish light that we do. And when they include references to Yeshua or to Christianity, they do so viewing Christianity as a religion of Gentiles, completely distinct from the Jewish experience. And similarly, Christian texts that have significant ideas that we also must learn from and interact with, more than not have often lost sight of their Jewish underpinnings. Now, the Jewish-Christian relations and the dialogue that's happening today is growing steadily, and both worlds are beginning to connect their roots together in more and more remarkable ways that are laying great foundations for new ideas. But for many, Messianic Judaism still remains a mystery. So we draw from these authors in both worlds, and we assume that there'll be things to take hold of and things we might rather leave behind. So please know that us recommending a reading does not endorse everything in that reading. Instead, we hope that you will wrestle with these ideas, even ones that you might disagree with, because we grow when we wrestle. In our syllabus, we had suggested that you pick up a copy of the Koren Siddur, and here I have a copy right here. And for our first article in the Koren Siddur, Understanding Jewish Prayer by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, we do have a PDF scan that you can just click the link there and go to the image. But in the future, we are going to be reading through portions of the service, and it's much easier to do that with an actual Siddur than with the PDF copies. I think you'll really enjoy the layout, the translations, and the commentary in the Siddur. If you can't get a copy, just let us know, and we'll try to help. In Unit 1, we'll be reading an article by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks called Understanding Jewish Prayer. And Sacks tells the story of Jewish prayer, spontaneous prayer, sacrifice, and the Siddur, all in the context of the Jewish experience. And there are some shaping ideas nestled in this article, along with the basic principles of the Jewish service. And the article is broken into 12 small sections, and I recommend that you read this devotionally and read one section per day, rather than read the entire article in one setting. And if the Siddur is new for you, you may find some of the material, especially section number 3 called Structures of Prayer, a bit technical, because you may not know which prayers are which, and that is okay. Don't worry about it. The big takeaway from this article is that you can come away with an appreciation for the beauty and intentionality of the Siddur and some of the key concepts that surround Jewish prayer as it's developed from biblical times to the modern era. So it's okay if it feels like a bit of a blur. The way that you learn the Siddur is similar to how you learn a language, by living in it. Once you internalize the basic structures and the names of the key prayers, it becomes very simple. In next unit, we have a great way to break down the service into smaller parts and to understand how all these things fit together. So for now, just ponder any questions that you have, and we'll get to them in Unit 2. Our second book is called Real Davening, and it's by Yitzchak Buxbaum. He's a Torah scholar. He was ordained as a Magid, or an inspirational teacher, by Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach and Zalman Schachter of the Renewal Movement. And he has some important things to say about Jewish prayer in the introduction to his book, which we have scanned at the link in the box here, just pages 9 through 12. Short little reading. I think that highlights that he brings out are that we're always in God's presence, and that our goal in all modalities of prayer is simply to draw closer to his presence. Now, a note here that Jewish Renewal Movement, which is really rooted in Jewish mysticism, will use terms that sometimes sound similar to terms used in Eastern or New Age religion. And for myself, having come out of the New Age world prior to coming to trust in Yeshua, I'm probably more sensitized than most of these terms. But terms like meditation or God consciousness, for example, what I found is that there is a marked difference between what the Jewish mystics of the 16th century and the contemporary New Age communities mean by these terms. The Jewish mystics being rooted in an entirely different system of rabbinic and Torah Judaism, and New Age being rooted in really a purely pantheistic experience. When I was a yoga teacher, I was taught to say God all the time in my classes, but I didn't mean the God of the Torah. I meant a kind of collective consciousness, that is, the sum total of the universe. The God of the Torah is to be found within everything in the universe, to be certain, but the universe is not the sum total of God's identity. So the goal in New Age meditation is to become more and more aware of your own divine self within, merging yourself with this universe. Whereas meditation in a biblical framework is simply different tools to lead to greater awareness of and deeper relationship with the presence of the God of the Bible in our lives. Similarly, God consciousness in New Age is taking hold of your own God self, ultimately becoming more and more God, achieving these higher levels of enlightenment to this divine consciousness, this divine collective experience. But in a biblical framework, God consciousness simply means becoming more aware of God and your relationship with Him. Of course, in the Jewish renewal movements today, much of this is blurred. So I wanted to make that distinction for us in our class. Our next reading is from Mike Evans' book, Why Not Waste Time with God? And in the beginning, we'll be just reading the introduction here, pages 15 through 19, so really short reading. And we'll actually be reading some different chapters from his book throughout the class. And he actually just sent us a case of these books, so I can give them out to you next week if you'd like. They won't come in until the first week of January. But for now, we have the PDF on the link there. Now, Mike was here at Ruach Israel for 2 of our conferences on healing prayer over the past years called Refuah Shlema. And Mike has been one of my mentors for years. And this book is really a gem. He includes a lot of great quotes and writes some profound truths in a simple and devotionally oriented way. The focus of this book is on spending time with God. And this unit will just begin with his introduction again. Now we have a few readings on the list from Michael Visegrad. Michael Visegrad, who recently died in 2015, was a German-American philosopher and Jewish theologian, and an activist for Jewish, Christian, and interfaith dialogue. He considered himself to be a part of the modern Orthodox movement, and he does not identify as a Messianic Jew, but his theological work in the realm of Jewish and Christian relations and his understanding of Jewish identity in a modern context helped create the theological underpinnings for the modern Messianic Jewish movement. His teacher was Jewish philosopher Joseph Soloveitchik, and he was also friends with Rabbi Mark Kinzer and actually gave a lecture at MJTI before he died. And he wrote a lot on a new perspective of Paul and just a Jewish view of the New Testament and how Jews and Christians can connect at deeper levels. Our first reading is from his book called Abraham's Promise. And there's a link to the actual book at the bottom of this, at the bottom of your Unit 1 packet. You'll see a reference link where you can click to all these individual books if you'd like to pick one up, if something's of interest to you more than just the sections we'll be reading. This book has an introduction, actually, by Kendall Solon, a Christian theologian whom we'll be reading some excerpts a bit later when we discuss supersessionism in the church. But in this book, we'll only be reading a remarkable letter that Visegrad wrote to Cardinal Jean-Marie Lustinger, who was the Archbishop of Paris. Cardinal Lustinger's parents were both Polish Jews, and Lustinger converted to Catholicism in 1940. Now, many Jews have converted to Christianity and completely leaving their Jewish identity behind. The difference here was that Cardinal Lustinger publicly continued to identify with his Jewish background. He identified as a Jewish Catholic rather than a former Jew. And Michael Visegrad wrestles with this idea. He had met Cardinal Lustinger in the past, and he decided to write him a letter concluding that Lustinger does indeed have a right to continue to identify as a Jew, but as a Jew, even as a Jewish Catholic, he's still obligated towards Jewish covenantal life. And while Visegrad's letter was never answered, and we would challenge him on his understanding of who Yeshua is in this letter and the concept of the Jewish concept of the divine Messiah. The letter nonetheless lays foundations for the modern Messianic Jewish movement and can help us Jewish believers in Yeshua understand our own Jewish identity and how important it is to our Messiah. In addition, I've included 2 extra readings from Visegrad's book, The Body of Faith. These pages are not required. They're a kind of a heavier theology, if you will, but for those of you who love theology and Jewish philosophy, these articles in a roundabout way create a roadmap for understanding God's unique relationship with the Jewish people, and then open the doors for seeing the inclusion of the Gentiles to come alongside Israel's election through faith in the Jewish Messiah. And so it's quite ennobling for the Messianic Jewish community to read. And those are there by the link as well. Lastly, in the Going Deeper section here, we have book recommendations that correspond with some of the themes of this unit if you want to dig deeper. Here we have 2 options for a history of the Jewish people. I was significantly impacted by listening to the audio version of Paul Johnson's A History of the Jewish People years and years ago. To understand Jewish identity and the Jewish people, understanding our place in Western history is essential. But it's more than we can cover during the course of the class, so this is something extra if you'd like to look into it. So we have two different books on Jewish history, and then To Pray as a Jew, a guide to prayer and the synagogue. And this is just a terrific resource if you'd like to go deeper. So in short, over the next 2 weeks, we have 2 video teachings to listen to, along with some light reading. The short Why I Am a Jew video by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs exercise. You'll begin to establish your daily prayer times and begin the daily Devar, and you'll meet with your Chavruta and do some light study together. And then we'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday when we'll get into the 2 different comings of Messiah and Tanakh and review some of our material from our spiritual practices work over the past couple weeks. So don't hesitate to reach out to me with a text or if you have a question, and happy learning, and we'll see you on Shabbat.